Come blue and white and we're looking good. You'll be in for a fight and we fight pretty good. Getting goals is our job and we get goals good. Looking good, we are Carlisle United.
Carlisle United, the team that's on the ball. Carlisle United, the team for one and all. You're looking good and we're with you all the way. You'll hear us singing every time you.
Hello everyone and welcome to the latest of our special episodes, and today we're going to be reviewing the 2021 season from an analytics and stats viewpoint. And to do this, I've got a special guest with me. I've got Geoff from Fox Analytics FC. If anyone hasn't been following Geoff's brilliant Twitter account all season, he's been putting up little stats and graphs and analytical images that have sort of broken down United's performances over the season. It's been really interesting, particularly in terms of the difference between pre-COVID break and post-COVID break, which we'll get onto later. But he's been really brilliant in doing that sort of thing, and he's agreed to come on and talk about these things. Thanks for joining us, Geoff.
Hey Lee, yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on.
No problem at all. Well, let's just get straight into it then. I mean, firstly, why did you start the blog? I mean, it seems there's a lot of these sort of analytics blogs starting up for most lower league clubs now. There always seems to be people who've got a real keen interest and are able to study the stats and sort of break them down for people. It's always something you've always been interested in analytics and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, there's a lot of them sort of popping up, and I sort of thought it would be interesting to look at Carlisle and how they sort of stood out in these things. And yeah, it's always something I've been interested in, and it was always something that was sort of like, Premier League and Champions League, sort of looking at all these stats. And over the last couple of years, the level of detail, even down to like National League and stuff is incredible. So yeah, I just thought I'd start one up for Carlisle and see how it went.
It does seem like there is so much data you can actually get now, doesn't there? Because I mean, like you said, this was always the sort of stuff you'd saw on Sky Sports for the Premier League, but at our level, I mean, I remember back when I was working for the media team at Carlisle, and even before that, I was just helping out. On a couple of occasions, I had to stand in for the person doing the Press Association live sort of stats, the ones you see on the BBC with all the details of what things happened. So I was filling in on a couple of those games, and you were guesstimating things like possession. Basically, every 10 or 15 minutes, you had to say, how much possession do you think, and who's been the better team over that period? And, so it wasn't 100% foolproof, to say the least, I think. So it's really interesting, isn't it? There seems to be quite a few sources you can get the information from now, doesn't there?
Yeah, so like you say, like these days you can see like, individual passes and like things like that. So it's like, yeah, it is down. So someone's there like recording it. And like you say, I think there's a load of these, and I imagine the club use a few of them as well. Like Jakey Blaine's obviously involved for the club. But yeah, like I sort of use Y Scout, which is sort of a really widely available one now. And this has got, a ton of data on there, more than you can know what to do with, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, let's get into it now then. We sort of split them into two sort of separate sections with a little bit in between talking about that 4-week COVID break. But first up, let's look at the team data stuff. So one of the first things you picked out was looking at the last two seasons' performance trends. So particularly the expected goals for and against. Now, for anyone who doesn't know what expected goals is, if you could sort of briefly explain exactly what that is.
Yeah, so expected goals is, it's basically a way of sort of defining how, like the quality of a shot, basically, like how likely you are to score from that shot. And it's sort of calculated using just vast amounts of data, the shots, where they were taken from, was it like a shot that was assisted with like a cross, or was it like a header? Just tons and tons of things are fed into this. And then it sort of spits out a number that gives you a percentage of how likely you are to score from that chance. So, yeah, people use these, vast data sets over a season to sort of say how well a team performs. So if you're sort of consistently creating better chances than you're letting the opposition have, then you'd expect to, do well, basically.
It's one of those things, isn't it? I think on a single game basis, it's not the great statistic to use, is it? But over a longer period, it's really good for actually looking at trends and how a teams are performing. I think that's
Yeah, spot on. Exactly, that's it. You see a few things where people quote like, game by game things, and they're quite interesting, but they don't really tell you much more than like the scoreline a lot of the time. So yeah, like this thing that I've picked out basically looked at the expected goals for and against since the 2019-2020 season, obviously when Stephen Presley started his first full season, and then all the way across to the end of this season. And there's a few interesting things in there, really. So, when Stephen Presley took charge after the first 10 games, so that's sort of like the window that we sort of typically use to sort of make an average, so you've got a decent amount of data there. Carlisle were conceding so much more than they were creating. It was, roughly, it was like 1.8 against and only 1 goal for. So, they were creating almost conceding double the amount of chances than they were creating. And that trend sort of carried on through most of the season. It was looking like things were getting a little bit better just before Chris Beech came in. And then obviously Chris Beech sort of steadied the ship and sort of guided Carlisle to safety. But then it really got interesting, after the first 10 games of this season, because basically things just flipped around pretty much. You could see Carlisle just were creating so much more. They were creating 1.8 and conceding less than 1. So it literally flipped, after 10 games roughly, and things just carried on really good until Christmas then. I think you can sort of say the rebuild that went on over last summer, and Chris Beech coming in and stamping his own style and things was going really well, and I think he needs a lot of credit for that.
I think those first 10 games as well this season, Lisa, you look at it, that was effectively a pre-season, wasn't it? Because the club didn't really get a proper pre-season with all the issues with COVID and that kind of thing. So you could almost take it as that, couldn't you, I suppose?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I think, like I said, Stephen Presley was sort of, I wouldn't say things were turning around necessarily, but I think some of the results maybe were a little bit harsh on Carlisle in a few of those games, and they were sort of turning the tide a little. But obviously, since Chris Beech has come in, I think he's really, really made a positive impact in terms of performances, at least.
Yeah. Next up on the things you put on here, you put number of shots for and against in the league rankings, because this is something I think that's been picked out by a few of the sort of League Two Twitter accounts for different podcasts and things like that. Is we perform pretty well in this, don't we?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting one, and I know Chris Beech talks about this a lot as well. Talks about number of shots that Carlisle have created and things, and it's really astonishing just how far ahead Carlisle are in compared to any other team in the league this season. So they've, according to Y-Scout, they've taken 640 shots across the whole season. The next nearest is Mansfield with 563. So that goes to show you, they're almost getting on for 100 shots more than the next team, and at the bottom is Scunthorpe with 363. So you can sort of see they've taken almost 300 shots more than Scunthorpe.
That's incredible, isn't it? It doesn't really come as much of a surprise. I haven't seen Scunthorpe play this season. So there you go.
Yeah, exactly. And on the other side of things as well, when you look at the shots conceded, again, Carlisle come top, bottom if you will, but they've conceded the least shots basically with only 350, and whereas Oldham conceded the most at 618. So they're really head and shoulders above all the other teams. And if you just look at shots for and against, Cheltenham conceded the second fewest shots with 395. So they're comfortably a shot a game less conceded than Cheltenham. And obviously Chris Beech has talked about this a lot. I remember the first game of the season, that 3-0 against Cambridge. He sort of said, he wasn't too disappointed with the result. And if you look at just the stats, if you just look at like the raw stats, possession and shots and things, like Carlisle did outshoot Cambridge by quite a lot, but this is where the expected goals comes in. If you look at the quality of chances, maybe Cambridge only had 3 shots on target, and maybe they were lucky to get 3 goals, but they were decent chances, whereas Carlisle were taking a lot of shots from distance and things like that. That's where the sort of shots sort of isn't always a brilliant measure, just looking at the pure numbers.
Yeah, well, I don't think anyone could have anticipated how well Cambridge would have done this season, to be fair. I mean, going into that game was a very bit of a shock result, that one. And yeah, I suppose that sort of highlights the issue maybe that Beach is going to face over the summer of trying to recruit a striker who's actually going to take those chances a bit more regularly than the players who play up front this season did at the moment. So, I mean, does that bring us on quite nicely to the shot quality in terms of league rankings, I suppose, which is the next bit you picked out?
Yeah, so obviously we've touched on expected goals a little bit. We've touched on like the number of shots conceded and the number of shots taken. So if we sort of combine those things together, so you can sort of say Carlisle, took the most shots in the division, but then when you look at the average quality of those shots, they came out joint second bottom with Colchester and Southend. So only Southend and Colchester were taking worse quality shots on average than Carlisle, and obviously,
it's not great company, that is it?
Yeah. So that sort of shows maybe where, over the whole course of the season where Carlisle fell short. Yeah, they were taking a lot of shots, but a lot of these shots, just from watching, they ended up being shots from really far out and things like that. And again, if you sort of flip that and look at the shots conceded, like I said, the right, down there, really few shots faced. But apart from Harrogate and Grimsby, they conceded the best quality chances on average, against all the other teams. So it's like, we talk about quality over quantity. It's sort of like the opposite with, Carlisle. Yeah, they're conceding very few shots, but the shots they do concede are, good chances for the opposition. And again, the shots they take, they take a lot of them, but they sort of come out as, pot shots a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's I suppose one of those ones in it where they, like I said there before, you can maybe look to tighten up front, but maybe in defence as well, he needs to. It's basically adding that extra little bit of quality just to stop the high quality chances coming in, and the other end, someone to take them away. Yeah,
I think it's been a real mix of like why this has happened. Like towards the end of the season, we saw like a few individual mistakes, didn't we, at the back where someone plays a back pass or someone doesn't quite make a good enough clearance or a tackle, and someone's straight in, and those sort of things. There's not a lot you can do there, like you say. Maybe look to strengthen a bit, but those sort of one-off errors, it's sort of happens from time to time. But the other thing is, maybe like with the pressing as well. Like if that's not well coordinated, and if they're pushing up too high and they don't commit enough people forward, then quite often a quick ball over the top can let you in one on one, and that I think that's happened a few times as well. So yeah, I think it's sort of been a bit of a mixed bag there, really.
Yeah. Next up, you've got what situations are shots taken from and conceded from?
Yeah, so towards the end of the season as well, I saw a lot of stuff online, and I noticed it as well. I think probably everyone noticed it, just how much Carlisle were relying on set pieces. There was a lot of like 0-0s and things, and then that sort of run where they sort of appeared to be sort of getting back to it a bit in terms of results, where a lot of them were just coming from free kicks, into the box or corners. So yeah, sort of if you look at the chances created from set pieces, they were only behind Cheltenham in that. So yeah, if you look at all the other teams in the division, only Cheltenham created more from set pieces than Carlisle did. So that you can look at that as a criticism or a strength, I suppose. You don't want to be over reliant on set pieces, but at the same time, with Callum Guy's delivery, it's always good to have someone in the box that can take advantage of that.
Cheltenham are champions, so they can't really come too much on that, can you? So
exactly. And also if you look at the chances conceded as well from set pieces, Carlisle were sort of like average in that department. So they, they're not really outstanding or not really very poor. They were just sort of middle of the road. So conceded a few from set pieces, but probably not something to be worried about. But the one that really stands out is how many chances they conceded from penalties. Obviously, when I say a chance conceded from a penalty, I just mean a penalty. But yeah, if you look at the XG for a penalty, it's typically like 76%. So about 3/4 of the time you're going to concede a goal from that. And for most of the season, Carlisle was sort of ranked worst for like the number of penalties they conceded. So that's maybe a bit of a worry. And I think we went through a bit of a period in New Year where there was a lot of like needless challenges going in the box, and it really turned a few games around, and a couple that were maybe a bit unlucky as well. But yeah, it did seem for a time after New Year that it was just penalties that kept causing us problems.
Yeah, that seems to be where we had quite a big issue in the second half of the season. I think I'd agree with you there. And you think about the players looking a bit tired, which I suppose will bring us nicely on in a minute, actually, to the bit of the COVID break. But first up, we've got minutes played by players. You got this one in because a few of the players played quite a bit, didn't they? Considering as well with the issues with COVID and stuff.
Yeah, really big shout out to Aaron Hayden and Callum Guy. Over the course of the whole season, Callum Guy played 94% of the available minutes, and Aaron Hayden played 92. And if you consider Paul Farman did 93, if you consider the first choice goalkeeper, Callum Guy played more minutes than him. It says a lot, just with all the fixture congestion and everything else that had gone on during the break and COVID. It's pretty incredible, and it also shows a bit as well if you look at the other the sort of numbers for the other players as well, maybe just how much Chris Beach is relying on a core of players. So yeah, I talked about Guy, Farman and Hayden, they were the only players who played more than 90% of the minutes. And then you're sort of looking at Jon Mellish, who did 87, who was pretty close, Luis Alessandro, 81, and then Tanner and Riley and Anderton sort of in the 70s. So that was sort of the main core. And then obviously we got Rhys Bennett coming in, he played 50, and then got Toure and Patrick hovering around the 50 mark. They sort of swapped quite a bit, didn't they? If one wasn't playing, maybe the other was, or vice versa. And obviously Jack Armour came in and made a really big impact, and he played just under 50% overall. So yeah, it was just to point out really just, a big achievement, and how much we sort of relied on Guy and Hayden sort of as the sort of spine of the team almost. And we would have been in a lot of trouble without those two, definitely.
I think it's fair to say, yeah. Okay, well, I think you sort of covered the penalties bit, haven't you? I think, or in fact, you haven't really compared to the rest of the division. How did we sort of sit in terms of that?
Yeah, so it was a bit funny. This really watching this throughout the whole season, it was looking pretty dire. I think before the Leyton Orient game, the second to last game of the season, Carlisle had only been awarded 2 penalties. And then obviously they got awarded 2 in that game, which jumped them up to 4th. So 4 penalties. So that isn't actually too bad. There was only 5 teams that had fewer penalties than that, but they were sort of rock bottom with only 2 games left in how many penalties they'd actually created. And I think out of those 4, I think Zanzala had created 2 of those. He'd sort of got into good positions in the box and been fouled. So that was something I was going to highlight a bit later as well, just how much of an impact he had made. And it was sort of something that was a bit lacking. I saw a stat earlier in the season just saying Carlisle was sort of ranked second for the number of touches in the opposition box, but they were ranked bottom for the number of penalties. And you sort of think, is there something going on there? Is it just a bit of bad luck, or is it that they're not controlled touches in the box? But yeah, it was just or maybe it's just a bit of there's a bit of a skill, isn't there, in, I wouldn't say winning a penalty, but sort of playing in such a way that you're gonna get into those situations where the defenders feel like they need to make a tackle. And yeah, on the other side as well, the penalties against, at one point Carlisle were sort of conceded the most penalties and won the least, but they sort of clawed a bit of that back. In the end, they finished sort of with only 4 teams above them and 4 teams below them in the number of penalties created and conceded. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see next season. Is it just the way they play, being quite aggressive, defensively, and maybe not looking for it that much on the other half, or is it just a bit of bad luck and it'll even out?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, before we go on to the sort of player data side of it, let's have a quick look at the 4-week sort of break that occurred due to the COVID games being called. I say 4 weeks. Actually, in the end, it was more like 6, wasn't it? Really, with about 2-3 games in the middle of it as well.
Yeah.
I think everyone could see clearly it had an impact on the team, but in terms of stats and analytics, is there anything that clearly shows that had an impact?
Yeah, so just looking straight at the obviously results, we obviously saw they fell off a cliff. Really, they were, before that break, they were looking at 1.86 points per game, and after it went to 1.08. So they lost a massive amount there, and if they carried on with 1.86 for the whole season, they would have won the division, I'd say. But yeah, if you look at what changed now. We haven't talked about pressing yet, but there's a stat that tries to measure that called passes per defensive action, and that basically looks, if you look in the opposition, well, it's like the opposition half and 10% of your own half, so it's sort of like the top 60% of the pitch. They look at how many passes the opposition make before the other team will, try and make a tackle, or they make a foul, or they, pressurise the opposition basically. So it's sort of a metric that sort of shows just quite how intense the press is. And Carlisle had the most intense press in the division if you look at that stat, throughout the season. And it was one of those things where you looked and you thought maybe they will be tired, but if you look at the stats before and after the break, they were pretty close. So they had an average of 7.4 passes per defensive action before the break, and then it only went up to 7.6. Now the lower number is obviously the better, because it's like how many passes can the opposition have? Can they sort of build up patiently, or can you sort of press them a bit? So that didn't really change that much. Now, obviously, game to game, maybe that was the case, but certainly by the end of the season, they were back to, back to the best in that sort of that department. I also looked at the interceptions. So, obviously, a big part of Carlisle's tactics are getting the ball forward quickly, and then either competing for that first high ball, or sort of picking up the ball after like interceptions, and winning the second balls. And before the break, they were making an average of 49 interceptions, and after it only went down to 48. So a very small difference again there. So like it wasn't necessarily down to them pressing less intensely, or like winning the ball back less. Another thing is the pass accuracy. Now, I seem to remember in that period of where we couldn't sort of buy a win, it was getting people were getting annoyed at the tactics then about like the long balls and things, and that did actually change quite a bit. So that went from roughly 55 like long passes a game to 59. So if you look like as a percentage, that's obviously increased by almost 20% there. And that was, if you count a long pass as a high, like a high ball, or one that's longer than 45 meters on the ground, then that was definitely something that changed. So was that like a tactical thing, or was it just Chris Beach talked about playing the conditions as well at some points. So that's the only thing really that sort of stands out, is like the passing like went a bit longer, maybe won the ball a little bit less, and then from there like you just obviously create a lot less playing the way that Carlisle sort of play. But again, looking at the expected goals before and after that sort of break, things just changed massively from that point. Like if you look on my blog or on Twitter, I've put a graph of like the whole like two seasons rolling for and against, and you can just see I've marked on the graph where that sort of last game was before the break. The sort of chances created and chances conceded just gradually go towards each other and then flip back around to where they were, at the start of the season. So it's like, there's definitely something in it there. They're definitely performing really well, and then that did have a big impact. And I know you've talked about it at length already, so I don't need to go into necessarily why, but it definitely affected things.
It's interesting, isn't it? There's a handful of the stats that obviously show that something happened, but it's hard to actually sort of pin down exactly what it was, which I suppose maybe suggests it's one of those sort of, not fitness is probably not the wrong word, but maybe almost mental fitness. Being the exhaustion of 12 weeks in a row of Saturday, Tuesdays can't really have helped those players, could it? I'd imagine.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, I was sort of frantically looking through all the stats I get my hands on just for something that would explain it, but there was nothing, like you say, there was like no one thing that sort of jumped out. Is this is the main thing? Like you say, just really exceptional circumstances, isn't it? And must be so tiring for the players.
Right. Well, we'll take a little quick break now, Geoff, and we'll be back in just a second where we'll go through some of the player data you've got together for this season. So we'll be back in just a second. Okay, we're back for part 2 of this special episode of the Brunty Bugle, focusing on the analytical side of the 2021 season. And we've got Fox Analytics FC's Geoff here with us to go through some of the stats. And we're going to look at some of the player data now. And the first one up is the man who, it's fair to say, had a season that I don't think anyone expected to come from him, especially in terms of the stat that you're going to look at. It's Jon Mellish, and we're going to look at Jon Mellish's goals, aren't we?
Yeah, so like you say, we sort of talked about maybe not having that sort of out-and-out goal scorer. I know it's been talked about a lot. And Jon Mellish, his goal return's been really, really good this season. He's scored 11 goals in the league, and if you look at the sort of position goals and the type of goals he scored and how he scored them, he's been sort of like a really versatile goal scorer. So all the chances that he got in the league totaled up to just over 7 expected goals, and like I said, he got 11 there. So he's finishing that. That's really, really outstanding finishing. And he scored goals from really tight angles. He scored goals from the edge of the box. He scored headers. So yeah, just really, really impressive, and it'll be interesting to see, if he can replicate that next season. Obviously, he continues to get into those good positions, but that sort of level of finishing is just superb. So it'll be interesting to see again if he comes up with a similar return next season.
It's interesting because that's the main focus for him, isn't it? I suppose if you'd picked out some of his other stats, they're probably not going to be particularly impressive, especially when you put them alongside Callum Guy and Joe Riley and people like that. But his contribution can't really be doubted, can it, in terms of his goals? And like you say, the stats there show that he's actually outperformed his expected goals, which is a real feather in his cap.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next one. We talk about all the goals, but the one who set up most of the goals for people this season, Callum Guy and his assists. Again, astonishing how well he's done with this, because, I mean, I imagine a lot of folks agree on the fact that a lot of his assists came from set pieces. At the start of the season, I don't think he was taking corners. I think Joe Riley took some in the early cup games, possibly. But he seemed to settle down as a set piece taker, and as a result, he ends up with an incredible amount of assists. Yeah,
like you say, I think most of them, I'm struggling to think of many that weren't from set pieces, to be honest. There was that sort of ball into the box after the corner, wasn't there, for one of Jon Mellish's goals. But yeah, like from corners, it's been really, really good. I think there's 14 assists in total. I think 8 of those are from corners. So yeah, I mean that's really, really impressive. And he also, the free kicks as well, especially from that area, sort of to at an angle just outside the box. Well, quite far outside the box. Sort of between the box and the halfway line, just sort of floating those balls in for someone like Hayden usually gets on the end of them. Just really, really impressive. And obviously he topped the whole division in assists. So that's obviously shows just how good he is.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are focused on the fact that a lot of them came from set pieces, but then you generally find the person who's top on assists probably does take a lot of set pieces. It's just the way it's going to be, isn't it? So there you go. Next up, Aaron Hayden. You got down interceptions for him. Yeah,
so like we talk a lot about Callum Guy's sort of winning the ball back, and especially quite high up the pitch and like winning those second balls and things. But Aaron Hayden as well. I think he ranked 10th by the end of the season in how many interceptions he had throughout all the players in the division, which sort of says a lot. And you watching him play, he's sort of one of those players, isn't he? Who's just quite good at anticipating things, and he's just if you look at actually where he made those interceptions, there's a lot sort of like outside the box as well. So it's it's just one of those areas I don't think that he gets a lot of credit for, but he's a really intelligent player, and to be ranked 10th from centre back in interceptions, it's really, really impressive.
Let's say a stat like that, you'd expect the midfield one to be sort of a Callum Guy style player, midfield player who's nipping the ball. Because I know George Tanner rate was quite high, wasn't he? I think for interceptions at the opposition half.
Yeah,
as a fullback, which is a really impressive stat as well. But for a centre back, like you say, to be so high, because it's not really interceptions you're anticipating with them, is it? It's more tackling and that kind of thing. So quite impressive. Yeah. Up next, Luis Alessandra and key passes.
So a key pass, that's another sort of new thing that's come in as well. It's essentially it's like an assist that wasn't scored, basically. So like a pass that creates a clear goal scoring opportunity. Again, it's a little bit it's down to a little bit of interpretation and a little bit of someone deciding if it was a good chance or not. But he's ranked 9th in the whole division in key passes. So, we know this from watching him, really, don't we? Just how good he is at sort of feeding the ball in, from like maybe outside the box into the box, picking those good passes and unlocking defences. But yeah, I think he was a bit unlucky not to come away with, a few more assists himself, really. And I think it's another one of those things that maybe he's a little bit underrated for, just how good he is at sort of creating those chances. I think there's a stat that a lot of people quote now called expected assists, which is basically it totals up the expected goals that are created from the passes a player makes. So that sort of shows how good someone is at creating chances. And he was basically ranked second, only behind Callum Guy in that this season for Carlisle. So he was one of the main creative players. And I think if more of them chances had gone in, people would have been singing his praises a lot more for it.
Well, I think it's fair to say on our pod, we've always sung his praises quite strongly. We've always said if he plays well, we play well generally. And I think that those stats probably show that, if he'd been playing well a little bit more often, I don't say he played badly particularly, but played a little bit better more often, we he might have made that extra bit of difference, I suppose, to push us over the line. Next up, our key lone player, Josh Kayode. You focus here on aerial duels and fouls suffered, because it's fair to say he probably didn't have the goal impact we expected, Kayode, after coming back on loan. But then again, he played out wide a lot, and when we were playing long balls, he was very much a target, wasn't he? And he was very good at winning those aerial duels. So
Kayode, obviously, I've been a really, really big fan of his this season, and with the way Carlisle play as well, sort of getting that ball forward, quite quickly and early. There's always going to be a lot of pressure on the forward players to compete for those balls. And Kayode has competed for the third most aerial balls across the whole division. Now that's pretty incredible as well, considering he was out on international duty and injured for a little bit as well. Just goes to show how just how involved he was in that.
Before you go further, Geoff, aerial duels, is that just attackers going for the ball? Is that including defenders as well?
Yeah, that's everyone. So that's attackers, defenders. So yeah, that really goes to show. Like there was a couple of centre backs I think that were above him, but yeah, it's really, really just goes to show how much sort of we were relying on him. Just especially the tactics that we're playing as well.
Yeah, and obviously, as you mentioned, he suffered a fair few fouls, I think it's fair to say, in the process of going for those aerial duels.
Yeah, so there was the sort of aerial duels, like we just talked about. There was a few of those where you would sort of get a barge in the back or something like that. But then there was also the sort of the taking the pressure off as well. Like you're trying to run the clock down, or you're trying to find a bit of an outlet. And he came really highly in there as well. I think he came 13th throughout the whole division for fouls suffered, which again goes to show what a big part he played there as well.
Well, he's not really sort of, I know he played out on the wing a lot for us, but he's not like a tricky winger like a Toure or a Patrick, as you expect he's going to be tripped up a lot. It shows he's more like I suppose in a sense he's more like a Joe Garner style forward, isn't he? And one who's going to get a bit battered in terms of pushing shoves and that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so yeah. I think that was an area that I sort of thought was quite important, and that he played really well in.
Well, next up, you've got a man who I imagine is going to have a big part to play next season, considering obviously not to give away when we're recording this, but Nick Anderson's left the club today, so Jack Armour and his crosses. I imagine he's going to play a big part as probably first choice left back next season.
Yeah. So. Armour, his crosses were, and he's just passes in general is something that really stands out. But he ranked 9th across the whole division for cross accuracy. So obviously that's balls from out wide into the box, and that was 42%. So yeah, if you look at the other players above him, he really stands out in that area. And I'm hoping that will continue next season, and with a few of the players that we've got, and maybe some that come in as well to attack those, it could be another weapon in the forward line.
Is it generally sort of wingers that are ahead of him in terms of the accuracy of the crosses, or is it full backs as well up there?
There's a bit of a mix there, but yeah, like obviously he only really started sort of consistently, didn't he, sort of the second half of the season, and he's young as well, so you just think that's one of those things that's only going to improve hopefully. And if you I've mapped them out as well, and if you look at where they all ended up, there's like a sort of a sweet spot between the penalty spot and the 6-yard box, sort of that area where the goalkeeper's not going to come, but you're still close enough to the goal to get a good shot, and just the amount of accurate sort of balls he's getting into that area on people's heads is really, really impressive.
I think it stood out as well when he played at right back as well, didn't he? Because although he obviously had to cut back onto his left a lot, his ability to then pick out a player with a ball from the right was really impressive as well when he switched to that side.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, from both sides. The map I've got of him sort of crossing in, like you say, those games or the sort of short period of time he spent out on the right, that shows as well. Like, just launching them in from all sides.
Yeah. Next up, obviously, we mentioned the fact that before about him winning penalties, but the impact that Zanzala had, especially after his, let's say, slow start, I think in the first 4 or 5 games, he made a really big impact, didn't he, at the end of the season?
Yeah. So. He's. I think if you don't count penalties because they can sort of skew the expected goals a bit, he had just over 7 expected goals. Considering he probably didn't play his first game till I don't know when his first start was. It was probably February sometime.
I think he played against Exeter in one game, and then he was on the bench, wasn't he, for the next 4 or 5? I think.
Right. Yeah. So considering the limited minutes played. He's, he had just over 7, so 7.25 expected goals in that time, and that actually ranked him 7th in the whole division for expected goals per 90. So that sort of unskews players that maybe didn't play quite as much as other people. So I think that just goes to show, just how good he is at getting into those positions and making a nuisance of himself in the box. He doesn't take a lot of shots from outside the box. He's not that sort of player, which Carlisle have quite a few of those. The sort of front three that they were typically going with for most part of the season, there was, a fair amount of shots from outside the box. Like I know Alessandra scored a beauty from outside the box, but more often than not, those sort of shots aren't, going to trouble the goalkeeper too much. But Zanzala is sort of a completely different player to any of Carlisle's other forwards. He really, gets a good number of shots from, inside the 6-yard box, headers, all sorts. And I really feel like he was a good addition and just adds something different. And I know there's a bit of criticism, wasn't there, saying like there wasn't that sort of player in the team, but I think he's absolutely that. And like you said, the penalties as well, that's just another someone that can hold the ball up in the box and cause defenders problems and stretch defenders. I think is really good.
Last up, sort of, Geoff, and on the list of things we mentioned here, we could potentially talk about the players who are sort of leaving and what we maybe need to do to bring in to sort of replace them. Anything you've got for that?
Yeah, so obviously when we're recording this, like who do we know who's not going to be here next season? Obviously we've sort of touched on Kayode a bit, so he's not going to be here. But I do sort of wonder how much Zanzala can sort of help in terms of that, making a nuisance of himself, holding the ball up. Like we've seen some good evidence that he can do that well, and he can take the ball, long balls forward to him. I wonder, if he'll, have quite as much of an impact, competing for aerial balls as Kayode does. But I'd be interested to see if Beach does look to go down that route and maybe pick someone who can sort of make a nuisance of themselves on those high balls a little bit more. Dean Furman as well, obviously. He didn't play that many minutes at all. I think he played 16% of the available minutes, but he's one of those experienced heads. There's not many. I think there was 3 players over 30 that played more than 90 minutes last season. So that's Alessandra, Furman and Farman. With him gone, that's only, Farman and Alessandra who are over 30. So it'd be interesting to see, people did talk about his impact in the dressing room, didn't they, Furman, and how, it was good to have that experienced head in there. So it'd be interesting to see if there's, anything in that area as well, and any other players that could potentially drop in there for Callum Guy as well.
And possibly a couple of defensive recruitments, I think, probably needed, with obviously Anderton leaving and Bennett sort of touch and go whether he's going to stay, I guess. Yeah,
that's looking at the squad that's left. Yeah, I think that's the other area that you'd look at, isn't it? Yeah, you sort of think you've got McDonald and Hayden who are your sort of natural centre backs. If Bennett, is, I guess, a little bit, no one really knows at the moment, but there's a good chance he'll go maybe. So that's definitely an area they need to recruit in. And someone we haven't really touched on as well is Toure. Now, there was a talk, wasn't there, would he stay or would he go? And to be honest, I'm quite glad that we've decided to keep him, because if you combine the expected goals and expected assists over the whole season and put that down per 90, because Toure only played 42% of the minutes, he just comes out like way on top in terms of how many sort of shots he was involved in. Like he leads all the players over the 90 minutes in terms of how many, the quality of shots that he took, and he provided a decent amount of assists as well. So yeah, I'm sort of, I think it is just that finishing that let him down this season. Like, I think we all remember him missing a couple of sitters and things like that. But I sort of think if that's an area he could improve on just a little bit, I think, and he gets the minutes as well, I think it'll be really interesting to watch next season, and it'll be interesting to see if it pans out for him.
I wonder how high on the expected goals that open goal he missed from, what was it, 55 yards, something like that. Right? Bless him, he had a go for that one, didn't he? I think we sort of said on the pod, didn't we? I think he strikes me as a confidence player, and with fans actually there, he's the sort of player that fans just love, don't they? Because he's got all the tricks and he's got all the little flicks, and he'll get the crowd going. I'm sure he'll drive them mad plenty of the time, but at the same time, I think he's the kind of player who'll thrive on having crowds back, and hopefully he can excel as well. I think that's everything, Geoff. Unless there's anything else you wanted to add in there.
No, I don't think we covered everything I had. Yeah, thanks.
Yep, well, that's brilliant. What we'll do is we'll give everyone a shout out to obviously get you to go and have a look at the blog. You can all check out Geoff's stuff. I'm sure there'll be a few of the bits he's talked about today you'll be able to find on there. We'll probably catch up with you some point next season, won't we, as well, to go through stuff and see how we're getting. And hopefully this time we'll be talking about us being clear in the league and not having to worry about games being called off and the season collapsing again with any luck. That'll be open. Geoff, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it, and all the best.
Yeah, cheers, Lee. Thanks very much.
No problem.